I'm Sarah Pennells and I'm the founder of a finance website for women called savvywoman.co.uk. Now, over the next half hour, we're going to be discussing the sandwich generation, people who are caring for their parents and caring for children at the same time. Now, while caring for children isn't seen as just a woman's job, more women...
You're listening to a Share Radio podcast.
You're listening to Share Radio's Women and Money programme. I'm Sarah Pennells and I'm the founder of a finance website for women called savvywoman.co.uk. Now, over the next half hour, we're going to be discussing the sandwich generation, people who are caring for their parents and caring for children at the same time. Now, while caring for children isn't seen as just a woman's job, more women than men do seem to end up taking responsibility for their parents when they get older and a bit frail. But whoever's caught in the middle, juggling the caring of children, parents and holding down a job can be a big challenge. If this is something you're experiencing and you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at weekend@shareradio.co.uk or tweet us at shareradiouk. My guests in the studio are Ben Black, who's the director at My Family Care, Jennie Kreser from law firm Silverman Sherliker, and Fadia Smart, who's senior associate at law firm Russell Cook. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Ben Black, first of all, just explain to me what My Family Care does.
Yeah, we specialise in helping employers be family friendly. When we do that, we started doing that by providing childcare support, and gradually that branched out, and now it's everything that might help anyone who combines any kind of family responsibility combine that commitment with a career. And are employers, is the message getting through to employers, do you think, that there isn't just an issue around, it's not just about bringing up children or having to take time out to bring up your children, but more and more people are faced with the responsibility of looking after their parents and trying to combine that with a career? The message is, I would say the message is definitely getting through. There's a lot of noise about it. We started off helping employers. We started a business called Emergency Childcare that allowed you to book last-minute childcare anywhere in the country, and IBM was the first big global client that said very clearly, and this is 7 or 8 years ago, we never do anything for our employees with young children to worry about without doing something in parallel for employees with their elderly parents to worry about. So I think that was 8 years ago. Now every HR department is talking about this, whether the company is following suit. That's the second part of the equation.
And Fadia Smart from Russell Cook, what are employers supposed to offer their employees, if indeed anything, if they have caring responsibilities?
Well, I think you'll find it depends on the employer. The first stance is if the employee has certain rights, they can request to work flexibly under the flexible working regulations, and they were changed last year. So all employees who have 26 weeks of continuous service can request to work flexibly, and that can mean a myriad of things. That can mean working part-time, could mean working flexible hours but still working full-time, for example. And there's a detailed procedure which has an accompanying ACAS code of practice, code and guidance, which sets out how employers are meant to deal with it. And primarily it's to deal with it reasonably and give their decision within a 3-month period from the request being made.
And what are the reasons? Because obviously, some businesses will be more able than others to accommodate people working flexibly, and indeed, presumably, for some parts of their workforce more than others. So what are the reasons that a company can give you if it says, actually, no, A, we're not going to let you, or we really can't let you?
Well, the law is actually quite open to employers to say no, quite frankly, because if they can show it has a detrimental impact on performance or cost, or an inability to meet customer demand, an inability to reorganise staff to be able to cover somebody working different hours, they can refuse the request. And there is an appeal process, but again, an employer, if they can show why they can't ameliorate that person's needs to work flexibly, can say no. But I think what I'm noticing as an employment lawyer, that, as Ben was saying, employers are aware of this. They want to retain good staff. They want to ensure that they're seen as being dynamic in dealing with these work issues. I'm hearing of more employers doing dynamic working, whereby they don't have strict 9 to 5 and they try and work according to just ensuring people get the work they need to get done. Now, your small employer may not be able to do that, but what I'm noticing is that there's more dialogue between an employer and an employee about such issues now.
Is it, I mean, understandably, for bigger employers, they may have more room for manoeuvre and they'll certainly have the resources to be able to handle this and sort of develop their protocols. But are you noticing that smaller employers in certain sectors, I'm thinking maybe tech sectors, where they don't necessarily have that kind of 9 to 5 sort of ethos, are some smaller employers also embracing this?
I think your question hits the nail on the head. It depends on the sector. So I'm noticing with a lot of my tech clients, they already offer flexible working just as a matter of course to all employees. So the law has changed so everyone, not those just with caring obligations, can request it. But there have been employers who have been doing that for several years, because if you have a computer at home and you're able to do what you need to do, then they're happy just as long as you meet their obligations.
And Ben, you mentioned that you were talking to IBM, 8 years ago. And how far has this sort of awareness and kind of ability stroke willingness to offer a more flexible approach spread now, do you think?
It's spread massively. I mean, it's all about business case for employers, and I always think the role of government is it does a bit of stick, but the carrot is far bigger. If there's a business case for employers to help their staff work flexibly and they can see a positive result, i.e. people are more productive, happier and more engaged, they'll do it. And you've got the internet these days, people can work more flexibly. So it started off, it used to be professionals and people who could obviously work from home, but these days you look at some of the best call centre operators like Sky, for example. They wouldn't dream of opening up a new call centre and saying, these are the hours you'll work. They go out to the community and say, who wants to work when? And they build the call centre around people's flexibility. So, no, flexible working is a reality these days, and lots of good results as a follow straight from that.
But there must be cases where people, they aren't able to work flexibly. And I was reading there's a report published, I think a couple of years ago, actually, by the Institute of Public Policy Research, which was showing that women are far more likely to give up work as a result of caring responsibility. I think it found that 17% of women who'd left their last job did so to care for someone, compared to 1% of women. And Jennie Kreser, I mean, we already know that, when women take time out, and it is still typically women, take time out of the workplace to bring up family, that can have a very serious knock-on effect on their ability to earn later in life and their ability to build up their retirement fund, all those kind of things. I mean, it seems that, if some women are being forced out of their job effectively because they have to make that choice, that's a double penalty, isn't it?
Well, I think it certainly can be. And the important thing to remember is that historically women have always had a kind of broken employment history, and that can have a significantly detrimental effect on their pension rights. And that's going to become, I think, as acute as ever, even though as we move on to the new flat rate basic state pension, there are a couple of issues that women in particular, I think, need to remember. And not least of which is that in order to build up, if you like, your rights to a basic state pension, you have to have a minimum number of years of national insurance contribution. And in order to get a full pension, you have to have 35 years worth of national insurance contributions. Now, it is important to remember that if you do take on caring responsibilities, either, whether it's a child or indeed for an older person, that there is an ability to build up certain credits towards your national insurance record. But it's important that those are claimed, because if they're not, you may find that your pension, when you eventually come to retire, and we know that that's moving the goalposts constantly, that you get a lot less than you were expecting. You're not going to get your £151 odd per week. You may get significantly less.
Because as you say, that there is the ability to get a credit if you're caring, but I think a lot of people, certainly from my experience and sort of emails I get, a lot of women are very aware of the fact they can build up their state pension when they're looking after their children, but they're not aware that there is an option or the possibility for them to do this if they are acting as a carer. So there is a sort of a lack of awareness about that particular right.
Yes, I think that is correct. And I think that more needs to be done to make sure that this information is out there. Now, yes, it's on the Gov UK website, and most people have access to the internet nowadays. But unless you don't know what you don't know, so unless you know that the information is there, it may not be an obvious thing for people to go and actually research. So certainly, I mean, it's not a bad website. I mean, go and have a look on that website. If you can work through the math to work out, it's got a way of showing what you might get by way of pension when you come to retire. If you can plough your way through that, by all means do so. Good luck with that. But it might not be a bad thing to at least have a look at the website.
Well, there's also a user-friendly article all about carers' credits on national insurance on my own website as well.
Of course.
So, but just to go back, you mentioned the state pensions changing in 2016, and just to very briefly talk about it, what does that mean? Because it's not going to affect people who've retired, but it will mean changes for people who reach state pension age after April 2016.
Correct, yes. So basically, it is going to do away, to some extent, with what's gone before, although your previous national insurance record will be the starting point for this new basic state pension. But essentially, you will just get one global figure, whereas in the past, you've had basic state pension, second state pension, additional. I mean, it just, pensions are complex and it's an absolute nightmare. So the idea is that you will just get one flat basic rate pension. There are a couple of quirks just to be cautious about, and I know this isn't necessarily a programme about pensions, so I don't want to witter on too long. But if you have at any time been contracted out of the old pension regimes, just be aware that could affect the amount that you get under the basic state the new flat rate basic state pension. It could be reduced. If in doubt, get some advice.
And that could affect, it could affect a lot of people, but particularly, say, people in the public sector, of which
Absolutely.
It's a big employer of women.
Absolutely.
Fadir, just talking again about the rights you have to work flexibly. Is there an issue that some people worry even about having the conversation because they don't want to be seen as being unreliable? They don't want to be seen as the one that everybody's kind of thinking, oh, they're taking time off again. Is there that danger, or is that just something that really doesn't exist?
I think that may be a perception that's starting to die away. Many employers will have a flexible working policy which sets out what issues an employee should set out in their request, which should hopefully remove away that issue. A point I did want to add, particularly those with caring responsibilities, whether they be children or adults, there can be discrimination implications if an employee doesn't deal with those requests properly. So, as you said earlier, women tend to have the lion's share of childcare responsibilities. So if an employer fails to deal with a flexible working request in an appropriate manner, they may not only have a claim brought against them in breach of the regulations, but also an indirect sex discrimination complaint. Or again, you may have an age discrimination complaint if you can see that those who are 40 plus tend to have caring responsibilities for their parents, or even a disability discrimination complaint if somebody has to care for a disabled person and it's having an impact on them. So, employers, beware when you're dealing with these requests. I also think we are seeing a generational shift in the attitudes to flexible working. So long as an employee's really thought out their request, the law protects them from being subjected to detrimental treatment for having made a request. So I think it's something that, as long as an employee's thought it out and sets out the reasons for it, they shouldn't be afraid of the ramifications.
And if somebody thinks that their request is being unfairly turned down and that there is a possible discrimination case, what should they do?
Well, the first step is that normally they'll either follow their employee's policy in respect of this, so the appeal process, or submitting a grievance to their employer, setting out why they think their decision to not consider their request or agree to it hasn't been upheld. And the ACAS guidance recommends trial periods. And so I think providing practical problem solving, so if an employer is concerned that this may lead to hundreds of requests from employees, perhaps suggesting a trial period before anything is finalised may allay their concerns.
And Ben, it seems from what you're saying that a lot of employers do get it and are really trying to help their employees. But to what extent do you find you are now sort of pushing against an open door, or is there some element where they just think, actually, times are tough, we're finding it hard to do our business, whatever that is, and this extra pressure can actually be a problem.
Well, it's interesting you talk about open doors. I mean, obviously, I always think small employers have it slightly easier because if you've got 50 people in the office, you can tell who's being productive and there are no hiding places. I think large companies have obviously got more resources, but they've got the challenge of how do you actually link performance to presenteeism, or not, as the case may be. So I think large employers get it at the top level, and there are lots of parts of every big business who get it, where you have an enlightened manager who's seen the light and said, look, I give my typically working women, but increasingly working parents, a bit of cultural empathy and a bit of flexibility, and it gets paid back in spades. But each of those organisations will have some of those prehistoric managers as well. So I think the trick when you talk about employees, how they should do it, it's not about following policies, it's about making the business case and proving how it will work, and giving the employer, if you've got one of those old-fashioned managers, no excuses for not understanding that this really can work in this day and age.
Ben Black, what are your tips for helping people sort of manage juggling, caring for children, caring for parents, working? What would help them if they are actually finding it quite difficult?
Well, I think we always look at it from the employer's perspective, but childcare is an awful lot easier than elder care for a number of reasons, because you make a positive decision to have children and everyone walks around with the bumps, and these days increasingly dads are busy showing off by the coffee machine about how they're going to become a father. So I think the very first bit is find out who else is a carer. We always say to employers who have no budget, there's so much you can do. Just identify the working carers, put them together, let them share stories, because guaranteed it's a lonely journey if you do it on your own, but everyone has been through something. Lots of people have been through something similar. So find other people and talk about it. And employers are keen to do more. So every employer has an EAP tucked away up their sleeve somewhere, which will have a free helpline. So
EAP?
An employee assistance program, some kind of helpline, which in theory will have an elder care expert on the end of it somewhere who's probably very good and doesn't get too many calls, which is why. So yeah, employers are set up to do more, but identify other carers and see what help is out there is the first step.
And I think you made a very good point that, it is obviously, if you're going to have a baby, it's quite visible if you're the woman, and it's just something that's talked about in a different way. And as you say, it's an active choice generally anyway. And how much do you think this is an issue, Jennie and Fadhia, that caring for parents isn't talked about in the same way? Because for a lot of people, it's quite tough. You're seeing your parent decline. It may be, there may be other issues as well, such as behavioural issues. I mean, it's not the kind of thing. It's not a celebratory event in the same way that having a baby is. How much do you think that's a problem?
I think it's a silent problem. I think you're absolutely right, and I'm getting to the advanced age where I do have an elderly parent. Thankfully, she's in very good health and is all the way there and halfway back. But I'm also aware that other colleagues of mine, my door is always. I'm not saying I'm the official shoulder to cry on in my firm, but often people will come and just. They just want to vent. They just want somebody to talk to. And often I'm finding much more now it is about elderly parents. And it's a very difficult thing because, they're not cuddly. Sorry, that sounds awful. It's not like babies that, you can ooh and ah. An elderly parent who you've always looked up to for your whole life, suddenly deteriorating before your eyes can be a very, very difficult thing to cope with psychologically, and performance may very well start to suffer as a result if help isn't given. Ben?
As Jennie's absolutely right. This is not a nice journey at all. The way we're set up in the UK, the NHS, if there's something that is an urgent need, is actually quite good and well resourced.
Great in a crisis, absolutely.
But if one of your parents becomes dependent and you are, in the great bulk of working people, the state cannot afford and is not set up to help you. And it's a massive, massive shock for people who think that somehow there will be a safety net. And there isn't. And it's almost like the system is designed to confuse you. There are 23 different benefits that you might be eligible for. Trying to work out if there is any support is an absolute nightmare. So this is it is no fun at all. And so many people have been through the journey and wake up one day and realise that the state is just not there. You think you've been working all your life and your parents have been working and somehow there's a safety net. And I'm making a slightly political point now. I think with austerity and everything else, there's almost been a gradual realisation in the country that, the state can't do everything, and family does have a huge role. I always look at Spain and Italy and wonder how much more bust they would be if the family wasn't doing all it does. And I think we still have that journey to go on in the UK.
I mean, you make a very good point, but I mean, a lot of families, certainly families that I talk to, they don't necessarily live near to their relative, and it can be quite difficult to kind of to and fro and go and see them, and even to kind of deal with something like social services and ring them daily and see what's happening. I mean, it's incredibly time consuming.
Well, some employers provide that kind of level of one-to-one support where they will say, one of your parents has become dependent, and they will put in place an expert who will hold their hands through that. And it's a two-stage process. The first one is getting the family together, siblings, parents, and having a conversation which can be very difficult. Who's going to move? Someone at some point has got to give up a career, or a family's got an elderly relative has got to move out of their home and come and live near one of their children. So the first stage is the emotional conversation, and the second stage is, how do you find a care home? How do you access some of the benefits that are out there? So,
and of course, there's a massive financial consequence of that as well, whether it's the parent having to sell a home or the cost of putting a parent into some kind of care.
Yeah. Can be hugely expensive. Fudia.
In my practice, I've noticed it's an issue that's coming up more and more. So although it may not be something that employers and employees are talking about on a daily basis, with an ageing population and with all the factors we've just discussed, austerity, etc., it's becoming an issue that's it's becoming on the forefront of discussions because, as you say, people live quite far away from each other. An intuitive and proactive employer will notice if somebody's regularly having to take time off to take a parent to a hospital appointment, etc., and those are opportunities for a discussion about it.
And Jennie, last point, and I'll ask you to be brief if you don't mind, but things that you can do financially to avoid the crisis in terms of power of attorney and dealing with financial companies, that kind of thing.
Yes. Well, most important is make a will. So many people make the mistake of thinking, oh, well, it will just go, where I expect it to go. And of course, it will not. And that leads to all sorts of appalling problems. Any solicitor, if you go to a solicitor to make a will, and of course I would say that you should also offer you as part of the package the provision of what's called a lasting power of attorney, so that if you or whoever is making the will becomes mentally incapable of dealing with their affairs, then there is a process automatically will be put in place to enable their affairs to be dealt with. And finally, as far as sort of financial situation is concerned, do your research first. Don't if you can, get proper recommendations from other people who have used a financial services company, because there have been stories of appalling situations arising. So do your work, do your homework, and don't just jump at the first offer that might be made.
And Ben, last thought from you. This government has been talking quite a lot about dementia and about cures for dementia and things like this. Is there any sign of any extra support? Because I think certainly for a lot of people whose parents have a form of dementia, that can be a particularly difficult journey for them.
I think there are bits of money that are being fed into the system, but not as much is going in as the problem is increasing, because we live longer, we have children later, and our parents are living longer. So, no, the way to fill the gap is the market has to get more efficient, the government has to put more money in, family has to do more, and employers have to step in. And you imagine if each four of those does as well as it can, then we have a possibly happy future, but don't hold your breath.
And what would your last word be to those employers who haven't? Maybe it's just genuinely not on their radar, they haven't thought about it, or they're not geared up to help people who are in that sort of in the middle of that sandwich of caring for both ends of the generations.
Well, I think the point is you've got to start looking at this. The numbers are truly frightening. You are going to have employees who do have elderly parents to worry about increasingly. And these are people, absolutely, it's black and white. If you don't find a way to support them, they have to leave. You cannot combine the two. So the plus point for employers, if there are any out there listening, is, working carers don't identify themselves very readily. So the numbers are small at the moment. So you can do lots of stuff. And you're talking about 1 or 2% who actually will put their hands up every year and need some support. So it's affordable at the moment. In 10 years' time, it won't be. So now is a very good time to be starting.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That's all we have time for in today's programme. I'd like to thank my guests Ben Black from My Family Care, Jennie Kreser from Silverman Sherliker, and Fudia Smart, Senior Associate at Russell Cook.